It started, as most suburban declarations of war do, with a piece of paper. Not a summons, not a subpoena, but something far more insidious. A laminated notice tucked under my doormat with the kind of sterile precision usually reserved for biological samples. I stood there in my doorway, bathrobe hanging open and a coffee mug radiating warmth into the cool morning air, and read the love letter from the Serenity Meadows Homeowners Association. I swear Karen Donaldson, the self-appointed queen of our beige dystopia, must have a commercial-grade laminator in her house just for this purpose. It keeps her venom from melting the paper stock, I figure. "Let's see what mortal sin I've committed this week," I muttered to my empty hallway. Grass blades exceeding the regulated 2-inch height by a millimeter? Mailbox failing to reflect the approved amount of morning sunlight? Ah, here we go. I took a sip of coffee. Violation of Covenant, 19, Section 4, Unapproved Antennae. My eyes drifted up to the offending object. It was a simple, discrete dipole antenna for my ham radio setup, mounted just below the roofline. I'd even painted the damn thing to perfectly match the house's official, soul-crushing trim color, grayish harmony. You could only see it if you were actively looking for something to be offended by, which, coincidentally, was Karen's primary hobby. The notice was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a symphony of bureaucratic jargon that danced around the simple fact that Karen had an issue with it. It mentioned daily fines, a reinspection schedule, and the potential for liens. A lien for an antenna she couldn't see without binoculars, and a burning sense of injustice. In the living room, the TV was on. A local meteorologist, a woman with impossibly white teeth, was pointing at a swirling mass of color off the coast. Twaidouan. And we are urging residents to pay close attention to this system as it develops. It has the potential to become a significant weather event for our area later this week, I scoffed. A significant weather event was what Karen called it when someone put their recycling bin out an hour too early. Later that day, hunched over a circuit board in my garage, my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude filled with the holy scent of solder and ozone, I saw her. The warden was making her rounds. Karen Donaldson's electric golf cart, silent as a shark, glided down the sidewalk. She came to a stop in front of my house, her helmet of blonde hair unmoving in the breeze. She squinted, her eyes tracing the roofline until they found my little antenna. She made a deliberate check mark on the clipboard in her lap, a grimly satisfied look on her face, before gliding away to inflict her unique brand of joyless order on the next unsuspecting homeowner. "You've got to be kidding me," I said to no one. I picked up my phone and called my buddy Dave, a man who had escaped to an apartment complex downtown specifically to avoid people like Karen. "Dude, she's escalating," I said the moment he answered. "Laminated notices now. I'm telling you, this woman has a personal vendetta against the 21st century and any hobby that doesn't involve scrapbooking or competitive petunia judging." "Just take it down, man," Dave's voice came through the speaker, pragmatic as ever. "It's not worth the fight. You can't win against an HOA. "It's the principle of the thing. It's my emergency radio antenna. What happens when that storm they're talking about actually hits and the cell towers go down?" "Then you use a carrier pigeon? I don't know," he sighed. "My advice? Don't poke the Karen. It never ends well." I hung up, feeling a familiar surge of frustration. To clear my head, I went for a walk, my feet taking me along the path that led up the small, grassy hill overlooking Serenity Meadows. There she stood. Ol' Bessie, I called her. A simple 50-foot monopole radio tower, all galvanized steel and function over form. She wasn't pretty, but she was the town's primary emergency services repeater. She was the digital town square, the lifeline that connected the county sheriff, the fire department, and the volunteer search and rescue team when all other comms failed. She was a beautiful, functional sin in Karen's aesthetically pure world, and I loved her for it. The next morning, the promise of caffeine drew me out on the same path, but I didn't make it to the top. I was stopped by a sound that didn't belong: the whine of a generator and the metallic scream of an angle grinder. I broke into a jog, my heart pounding with a sudden, horrible premonition. And there it was, the desecration. A plain white work van was parked at the base of the tower. Two contractors, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated boredom, were systematically dismantling Ol' Bessie. One was up on the pole, unbolting the antenna array. The other was on the ground, sending a shower of sparks into the air as he cut through one of the thick guy wires. And standing next to the van, arms crossed, clipboard in hand, was Karen Donaldson. "What the hell is going on?" I yelled, out of breath as I reached the scene. "That's the emergency repeater." Karen turned her head slowly, her expression as placid as a frozen pond. "Good morning, Mr. Maxwell. As you can see, we are removing this unauthorized and unsightly structure. It violates multiple HOA covenants on height and industrial appearance." My brain failed to compute. "It's not an HOA structure. It's owned by the county. It's for the fire department, the police." "The land it's on," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her clipboard, "falls under the Serenity Meadows Charter. I filed the appropriate paperwork with the county. They were negligent in their response time. So, under Bylaw 28, Section 7, the board has taken action to remove the blight." I turned to the guy with the angle grinder, who had paused to watch the show. "You know what this is, right? You're disabling an emergency tower for the entire area." He just shrugged, a motion of pure mercenary indifference. "We just do what the work order says, pal. She's paying the bill." Karen favored me with a smile, then a thin, triumphant slash in her face. "Besides, in the event of an emergency, everyone has a cell phone these days. This is just an obsolete eyesore. Consider it a community beautification project." I stared at the tower, at the sparks, at her smug face. It was like watching someone dismantle a lighthouse because it clashed with their beach blanket. The sheer weaponized stupidity of it was breathtaking. And that smile, that was the smile of a tyrant who had just hung a live, laugh, love sign in the gallows. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked away. The grinding sound started up again behind me, a screech of victory for her, a call to arms for me. I stormed into my garage, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. My mind was a whirlwind of fury and disbelief. Call the cops? She had paperwork. Call the county? By the time those bureaucrats figured out which department was responsible for being outraged, Karen would be nominating the stump for an award in landscape design. I needed to fight beige with tech, fire with fire, or, in this case, idiocy with ingenuity. My eyes darted around the room, over oscilloscopes, 3D printers, and tubs filled with wires and components. I kicked a cardboard box labeled Old Modems. It felt good, but it wasn't a solution. I needed a solution. I had to restore the signal. But how? She'd just tear down anything I built. The tower's weakness was its location. It was static, grounded, a sitting duck for a woman with a grudge and a laminated bylaw. But what if the tower wasn't on the ground? My gaze fell upon a large, long box in the corner, covered in a thin layer of dust. The label, written in my own Sharpie scrawl, read, "High Altitude Balloon Project." It was a passion project I'd been tinkering with for months, something I was planning to use to take near-space photographs. What if the tower was in the sky? A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. My rage found a channel. It found a purpose. This wasn't just about restoring a signal anymore. This was about making a point. I looked at the clock on the wall. The contractor's truck was just pulling away from the hill, leaving a neutered steel stump in its wake. "Okay, Karen," I whispered to the empty garage. "You started this. Let's see how you like my community beautification project." The next 4 minutes were a blur of frantic, focused creation, a symphony of defiance set to the imaginary beat of a ticking clock. Minute 1. I ripped open the balloon project box. The massive folded neoprene of the weather balloon spilled out, followed by a small helium tank. I grabbed my pre-packed amateur radio repeater, Go Kit, a small Pelican case holding a Raspberry Pi, a radio interface, and a sensitive duplexer that allowed it to transmit and receive on nearby frequencies simultaneously. Minute 2. My soldering iron was hot in 30 seconds. With hands surprisingly steady, I connected a lightweight, flexible solar panel array to the repeater's power system. I wasn't sure how long the internal battery would last, but with this, it could theoretically stay aloft as long as the sun was out. I grabbed a large styrofoam cooler, the kind you take on picnics, and began zip-tying the entire electronics assembly inside, carving out crude holes for the antenna to poke through. It was ugly, but it was insulated and light. Minute 3. I flipped open my laptop, its screen a beacon in the cluttered garage. My fingers flew across the keyboard, modifying a simple Python script. The code would manage the repeater, but more importantly, it would have the device auto-report its GPS location, altitude, and battery status directly to an app on my phone every 60 seconds, a homing beacon for my Spite. I ran a quick test on the radio link. A short burst of static, then a clean, crisp tone echoed back. We were in business. Minute 4, I dragged the whole contraption, the helium tank, the balloon, the styrofoam cooler of vengeance, into the center of my backyard. I started inflating the balloon. It grew with a soft, hissing sound, transforming from a limp sheet into a huge white orb that strained against the green grass. It was beautiful. Tether in one hand, I did a final check. I picked up my handheld radio and switched it to the now silent emergency frequency. Dead air, just as I thought. With a dramatic flourish that no one but my neighbor's unimpressed garden gnome was there to see, I put on my sunglasses. I took a deep breath, and with a flick of a utility knife, I cut the tether. The effect was instantaneous and glorious. The retaliation repeater shot upwards, the styrofoam cooler dangling beneath it like the world's most pathetic lunar lander. It cleared my roof. It cleared the tops of the tallest oak trees. It just kept climbing. A silent, majestic sentinel ascending into the clear blue sky. It drifted slowly until it was positioned almost perfectly over the center of the subdivision. A new star in the Serenity Meadows constellation. I let it climb for another minute before picking up my handheld radio again. I keyed the microphone. KD8 LMA, testing, I said, my voice steady. 1, 2, 3, testing. A half-second later, my own voice broadcast back to me from the radio's speaker, crystal clear, strong, and relayed from 1,000 feet above the ground. It worked. Oh, it worked better than I ever dreamed. I looked up at the white sphere hanging in the sky, then slowly turned my gaze in the direction of Karen Donaldson's house. "Checkmate, you glorious witch," I smirked. "Your move." It took less than an hour for the blowback to arrive. I was lounging in a lawn chair, sipping a celebratory iced tea and tracking my glorious creations telemetry on my phone, when Karen's golf cart came screeching to a halt at my curb. She didn't get out. She just sat there, vibrating with a rage so pure it probably could have powered a small city. "What is that?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. She pointed a trembling, perfectly manicured finger at the white dot in the sky. I took a leisurely sip of my tea before answering, letting her stew. "That?" I said, a picture of innocence. "Oh, that's my, Community Communications Enhancement Device, a CCED for short. Runs on sunshine and civic duty. Pretty, isn't it? You are in violation of Section 12, Airborne Nuisances, and Section 21, Unapproved Structures, she sputtered, practically quoting the bylaws from memory. That is an eyesore of astronomical proportions. Now, Karen, let's be reasonable, I said, putting on my best condescending tone. Technically, it's not a structure, it's a vehicle. An unmanned free balloon, to be precise. And, as you can see, it's not in Serenity Meadows, it's above it. A completely different jurisdiction. You'd have to take your complaint to the Federal Aviation Administration, and I can assure you I am operating well within my rights under Part 101 of their regulations for high-altitude balloons. Weight, payload, time of day, all by the book. She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I'd hit her with something she couldn't fight, a bigger, more powerful bureaucracy than her own. "I am calling the police!" she finally managed to get out. "Please do," I said, giving her my brightest smile. I would be absolutely delighted to explain to them how I've single-handedly restored emergency communications to their patrol cars after you illegally commissioned the destruction of vital county infrastructure. The color drained from her face. She sputtered for another moment, shot me a look that promised a slow and painful demise, and then spun her golf cart around with a squeal of tires on asphalt, speeding off to plot her next move. 30 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled silently to my curb. Officer Miller got out. He was a man in his late 40s, with the profoundly weary look of someone who had seen every possible flavor of human stupidity, and was no longer surprised by any of it. He took off his sunglasses, looked up at the sea-seed, looked at me, and sighed a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire county. "Afternoon, Leo," he said, his voice flat. "Let me guess. The Community Communications Enhancement Device?" "Officer Miller," I said warmly. "So glad you're here. Tell me, how's your radio working? Getting a nice, strong signal today?" He paused, then almost reluctantly keyed the microphone on his shoulder. "Dispatch, how's my signal?" A woman's voice came back instantly, perfectly clear, without a hint of static. "Loud and clear, Sergeant, 5 by 5. Honestly, it's better than it's been all year in this subdivision." Miller shot me a look that was 1 part annoyance and 9 parts begrudging respect. He unkeyed the mic. "All right, you made your point. Mrs. Donaldson is claiming you've launched an illegal surveillance device." "It's a repeater, not a spy camera," I explained. "It's dumber than a box of rocks. It just listens on one frequency and retransmits on another. No camera, no microphone, no storage. You're welcome to inspect the schematics. Unlike that tower she just turned into scrap metal, which, last I checked, was a felony destruction of public property." "Yeah, we're looking into that," Miller said, rubbing the back of his neck. "The chief is currently having a very loud, one-sided phone call with the county manager. For now, just tell me this. Is this thing a danger? Is it going to fall on someone's prize-winning petunias?" "Parachute deploys automatically if the balloon fails," I said. "And I'm tracking its GPS position in real time right here on my phone. I promise you, officer. It's safer than Karen behind the wheel of that golf cart." A tiny smile played on Miller's lips before he suppressed it. "Look, officially, I'm here because of a complaint. A ridiculous, petty complaint, but a complaint nonetheless. Unofficially..." He looked up at the balloon again. "Nice work, but you've kicked the hornet's nest, Leo. Watch your back. And for God's sake, try to keep it under 1,200 feet. The FAA starts asking more questions above that." He got back in his car and drove away, leaving me with the distinct feeling that I had just acquired a very reluctant and very unofficial ally. The next day brought the drone wars. I was in my backyard command center, the lawn chair, when my phone buzzed with a proximity alert I'd coded into my tracking app. I looked up and saw it. A small, white quadcopter drone, the kind realtors use to make boring houses look slightly less boring, buzzing erratically towards my balloon. Down the street, in her own backyard, I could just make out Karen's blonde helmet, her face buried in a controller. I had to give her points for creativity. She was trying to perform an aerial vasectomy on my balloon with a DJI Phantom. It was the most pathetic dogfight in history. Her little drone struggled against the wind at that altitude, its motors whining in protest. It made a few clumsy, drunken passes at the balloon, getting nowhere near it, before its low battery warning beeped pathetically, and it began to auto-descend back into her yard. I took a triumphant sip of my lemonade. Amateur. That evening, the game changed. The joke stopped being funny, and the stakes got real. I was in my garage, fiddling with a new antenna design and listening to the local search and rescue frequency out of habit. Suddenly, the scanner crackled to life with a panicked voice. A teenager, hiking on the wooded trails behind Serenity Meadows, had fallen and badly twisted his ankle. He was off the main path, his cell phone had no service, and a volunteer SR team was being dispatched as dusk began to fall. I listened as the radio traffic grew more frantic. Can't get a solid comms link since the hill repeater went down," the SAR leader's voice crackled, broken by static. "I'm barely reading you, Mark." "Copy that, breaking up. Location unclear," the other voice replied. They were flying blind. They couldn't coordinate because of what Karen had done. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about property values anymore. I hesitated for only a second. I grabbed my own microphone, took a deep breath, and broke into their conversation. "Search and rescue. This is Civilian Station KD 8 LMA, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. "Be advised, there is a temporary amateur repeater currently active in the area. If you switch your radios to frequency 446.500, you should have a clear line-of-sight signal." There was a moment of confused silence. Then, a click. Copy that, Civilian Station," the SAR leader's voice came back, tentative. A few seconds passed, and then his voice boomed from my speaker, perfectly clear, relayed through my balloon. "Holy cow. Okay, I'm reading you 5x5. Who is this?" "Just a concerned citizen, sir," I replied. "Happy to help." For the next hour, I sat in silence, listening as the SAR team used my retaliation repeater to coordinate flawlessly. They located the injured kid, guided a paramedic to him, and organized his extraction from the woods. When the kid's grateful father came on the radio to thank the team, I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected. Genuine, unadulterated pride. My spite balloon had actually done some good. The next morning, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was George, a quiet man in his 70s from 2 doors down. He was a retired electrical engineer, a fact I only knew because he'd once helped me troubleshoot a faulty sprinkler system. He was holding a plate of chocolate chip cookies. "I heard on the scanner last night," George said, his eyes twinkling. "My grandson Ethan is on that SAR team. They said your balloon saved the day. My daughter wanted to thank you." He handed me the plate. "Just trying to be neighborly," I said, a little embarrassed. George peered past me, his gaze falling on the organized chaos of my garage. "That's a nice setup you've got in there. I used to work on RF systems for Hughes Aircraft back in the day." He lowered his voice. "What Karen did to that county tower was a disgrace to engineering. If you need a hand optimizing your uplink or want to talk antenna patterns, you let me know." I grinned and waved him inside. Over coffee and cookies, we pored over my schematics. A friendship was forged. My one-man operation had just become a 2-man command center. We needed a more permanent solution, a ground-based one Karen couldn't see. George knew a guy. The diner was called the Greasy Spoon, and it lived up to its name. The air was thick with the smell of bacon and old coffee. In a cracked red vinyl booth, George and I met with Sal, the owner of a company called Stealth Installations, Inc. Sal was a mountain of a man in a flannel shirt, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Standing silently by the door were his two nephews, the twins, lanky, identical young men who looked like they communicated telepathically. "So," I began, leaning forward, "George here recommended you. We have a unique problem. We need to wage a quiet war against an HOA. Sal took a long, slow sip of his coffee, his eyes unblinking. "I've installed satellite dishes inside fake rock chimneys. I've hidden shortwave radio antennas inside flagpoles for doomsday preppers, but I've never gone to war with an HOA. A slow grin spread across his face. "I'm listening." "Karen disabled the county repeater," I explained. "My balloon is a temporary fix. We need something permanent. We need to either secretly repair the main tower or install a new distributed network that's completely invisible," George chimed in. "A mesh network, a series of low-power micro-repeaters, hidden in plain sight, inside fake rocks, custom-built birdhouses, flagpole toppers." Sal's grin widened. "Fake rocks, I like it. My nephews are artists with epoxy and fiberglass." He leaned back, his bulk straining the vinyl. "But it won't be cheap, and it'll have to be a rush job." He nodded toward the TV above the counter. The local news was on. The woman with the white teeth was back. "Has now been upgraded and officially named Hurricane Melissa," she was saying, "and the latest models show it tracking directly for our coastline. Landfall is expected in approximately 36 hours. My stomach tightened. This was it. The moment the joke stopped being funny. My balloon, my little act of defiance, was now officially the only thing keeping our region's emergency comms online. And it was designed to take pictures of clouds, not survive a Category 2 hurricane. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was an email forwarded from a frantic-sounding county official. It was a formal complaint from the FCC, initiated by one Karen Donaldson, alleging unlicensed broadcasting, airspace violations, and signal interference. The bureaucracy was finally catching up, at the worst possible moment. My phone rang again. It was Officer Miller. "Leo," he said, his voice grim. "You need to know the brass is getting serious pressure. The lawyers are involved. They see the FCC complaint and they're panicking. They want that balloon down." "Are you kidding me?" I exclaimed. "There's a hurricane coming. It's the only thing that's working." "I know, the fire chief knows. We're all arguing on your behalf. But the lawyers don't care about logic, they care about liability." Miller sighed. "They just see a complaint from a concerned citizen and an unauthorized device. They're trying to cover their asses. You've got maybe 24 hours before they get a court order and make me come over there and cut it down myself." I hung up the phone, a cold dread settling over me. 24 hours. The clock was ticking. The storm was coming. And my only backup was a guy who built panic rooms and his two telepathic nephews. We were so screwed. The next 36 hours were a blur. The sky turned a bruised, sickly yellow. The wind began to pick up, first as a whisper, then a moan, then a shriek. Hurricane Melissa had arrived. My garage became a war room. George and I had set up a command center, the space lit by the eerie glow of my laptop screen and a couple of battery-powered lanterns. The power to the neighborhood had died hours ago. Outside, the world was a howling chaos of wind and lashing rain. On my main monitor was the balloon's telemetry. Its altitude was fluctuating wildly, dropping and surging hundreds of feet with every powerful gust. It was a bucking bronco in a sea of violent air. Its little solar panels were useless in the maelstrom. We were running on the internal battery, and the charge indicator was slowly, inexorably ticking down. She's holding, but just barely, George said, his eyes glued to a different screen monitoring signal strength. The signal is degrading with every major gust. How much time on the battery? I asked, my voice tight. 3 hours, maybe 4 if the wind gives it a break. It wouldn't. The storm was only getting worse. This was our window. Through the rain-streaked garage window, I could see them. Sal's van was parked down the street, its dark shape barely visible in the dark. During the brief lulls between the most violent squalls, I'd catch glimpses of the twins. Dressed head to toe in black rain gear, they moved like ghosts through the neighborhood, a fake rock in one hand, a drill in the other. They were installing Sal's mesh network, racing against the storm, and my balloon's dying battery. Meanwhile, in her own personal fortress, Karen Donaldson was having a crisis. A massive oak tree in her backyard, one that probably violated some height ordinance she herself had written, had cracked and fallen, taking out a section of her pristine white vinyl fence. In the chaos of the impact, with the wind tearing the back door open, her prized miniature poodle, Prince, had bolted. She was frantic. The power was out. The cell towers, as I had predicted, were overloaded and useless. She was alone in the dark, her dog lost to the hurricane. She tried 911 on her landline, but the lines were dead. There was only one option left. In the drawer of her emergency preparedness kit, a kit she probably assembled more for the look of it than any practical purpose, was a set of two-way emergency radios the HOA had distributed years ago. Radios that were programmed to the standard county emergency frequencies. Radios that, at this very moment, were routing their signal through a styrofoam cooler hanging 1,000 feet above her house. The static on our main radio channel suddenly broke. A voice, high-pitched with panic, cut through the noise of the storm. "Hello, is anyone there? Can anyone hear me? My dog is missing! He ran out into the storm!" George and I looked at each other. There was no mistaking that voice. It was Karen. A dark, petty part of me. The part that had launched the balloon in the first place wanted to just turn the radio off. Let her scream into the void. It would be poetic justice. But then I looked at the screen showing the SAR team, now on standby, unable to deploy in the peak of the storm. I thought of the injured hiker. I looked at George, whose grandson was one of those SAR volunteers. This was never just about being petty. It was about being prepared. It was about community. I picked up the microphone. My voice, calm and clear, filled the garage. "This is KD8 LMA. I read you, ma'am. What was your location again?" Karen's voice came back, choked with a sob of relief. "This is Karen Donaldson, 12 Willow Creek Lane. My dog, Prince, he's out there somewhere." I keyed the mic again, switching to a neighborhood watch sub-channel I had established. "All right, everyone. Leo here. Mrs. Donaldson's dog is loose near Willow Creek. Anyone who can safely check their yards or covered porches, please do so. Report back on this channel." For the next 20 minutes, my spite balloon became a beacon of hope. Neighbors, hunkered down in their own homes, used the radios to coordinate. "This is Bill at 15 Willow Creek. Just checked my back deck. No sign of him." "Susan at number 10. I think I heard barking near the cul-de-sac by the fallen oak." It was me, the neighborhood tech nerd and my illegal repeater, conducting a search and rescue operation for my arch-nemesis's poodle in the middle of a hurricane. The universe had a sick sense of humor. Finally, a voice cut through. It was George's grandson, Ethan, who lived on the next street over. "Leo, this is Ethan. I've got him. Little guy was hiding under our generator cover. He's scared, but he's safe." I switched back to Karen's channel. "Mrs. Donaldson, this is Leo. We've found him. Ethan has him at 18 Hemlock Drive. He's safe." The sound that came over the radio wasn't words. It was a raw, unfiltered sob of pure relief and gratitude. For the first time, Karen sounded human. The storm passed by dawn. The wind died down, leaving an eerie silence broken only by dripping water and the distant sound of chainsaws. My balloon, its battery finally dead, had descended gently on its parachute, landing harmlessly in the middle of the community soccer field. It didn't matter. Its job was done. Unseen, unheard, and unnoticed, a network of fake rocks, birdhouses, and flagpole toppers was now active. Sal's mesh network was online, stronger, more resilient, and completely invisible. A week later, at a special HOA meeting in the community clubhouse, the damage was assessed. But the main topic of conversation was the comms failure. The fire chief was there. Officer Miller was there. They explained in no uncertain terms that the only reason a bad situation hadn't become a catastrophe was because of an unauthorized civilian-deployed repeater. Karen stood up. She looked pale. Her hair, for the first time I could remember, was slightly out of place. She looked at the fire chief. Then her gaze drifted across the room and found me. I was wrong, she said, her voice quiet but clear in the stunned silence of the room. I did not understand the importance of the tower. My actions endangered this community, and she took a shaky breath. I need to personally thank Leo Maxwell. He saved my dog. It was the single most shocking thing I had ever heard. The room erupted in murmurs. I just gave a small nod. The board voted unanimously not only to fund the county's repair of the main tower, but to pass a new bylaw, the Maxwell Amendment, as some were calling it, making all designated emergency infrastructure exempt from aesthetic covenants. A few days later, I was back in my garage, cleaning up. George popped his head in, holding 2 cold beers. "To victory," he said, handing one to me. "To common sense," I replied, clinking my bottle against his. We sat there for a moment in comfortable silence. Through the open garage door, I saw a figure walking down the sidewalk. It was Karen, with Prince trotting happily on his leash. She saw me watching. Our eyes met across the perfectly manicured lawn. She stopped. For a long second, I thought she was going to say something, maybe issue a new violation for the oil stain on my driveway. But she didn't. Instead, she gave me a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't friendly, it wasn't warm, but it was a nod of respect. A truce. I smirked, raised my beer bottle in a 2-finger salute, and took a long drink. The war was over. The beige had not won, and somewhere, hidden in a fake rock just a few feet away, a tiny green LED blinked steadily, a silent guardian in the quiet, and now slightly more sensible suburban peace.